Right, morning. Welcome everybody. Today we're talking about the untrodden path or mainstream. Which route do you follow? So yeah, seeing Lee's decided to take the untrodden path and left us in the lurch this morning. So we're going to have to see if we can wend our way through this morning without her guidance and an initial input. So it's being left up to us. So yeah, it's a quote I've used many times before. I think it's a quote I love. George Bernard Shaw quote says, "The reasonable man adapts." Let's try that again. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. So yeah, do you want to go mainstream or do you want to go the untrodden path and be part of progress? It's an interesting thought because following up on our discussion from yesterday where we spoke about the norms and rules and whether they're good or bad, and now we're saying, well, I'm saying, maybe you guys will say something different. You can't have progress if you don't buck the system, if you don't take the untrodden path. But does that mean breaking laws, or does it just mean breaking rules? I think that's the real question, or ignoring the rules. So yeah, be interesting to see what you guys think. So Trevor, let's start with you. One of the key rule breakers in the group here.
You give a dog a bad name right in the beginning, and you force him down a certain road. Now, Ivan, you'll be aware that we were working together last night when someone came in, knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I want to find out what it is you guys are doing." I think I mentioned to you my neighbor was moving off to France and looking to do something over there. By the way, this neighbor of mine, he was the guy who took 7 AK-47 bullets to the body in the year 2000. I had to pick him up and patch him together at that time, and that caused me to build what is now a R1 billion revenue generating enterprise over the last 20 odd years. And I'm sure you won't mind me chatting about him, because we were sitting here and he was saying, "No, well, I'm going to be over there in France." He's similar age group to me, wrong end of 60 now. And he was saying, "Man, what can I do over there? What are you guys doing?" So I introduced him to Ivan. Ivan turned around and told him about all the massive things we were doing since COVID hit us about a year ago. And he really looked at this and said, "Man, I can't understand this." And he's a technical expert. And Ivan talks his language. I know he doesn't understand me at all because I'm non-techie. And then I said to him, "No, but you must have a look. Have you had a look at these guys who are doing these reactionary videos on YouTube?" And he said, "Reactionary videos? What are those?" And I took him back to the guys who in 2018, just before 2019, 2020, when this blooming development of social media and all of that is relatively young when you go back and have a look at it. So I took him to a guy in New York, and almost seems to have been brought up in Harlem. And what this guy was doing, a black guy, a youngster, 26 years of age, was sitting reviewing and reacting to Pink Floyd. Now, most of us grew up with Pink Floyd, apart from Ed, he's goody two shoes. But he may have been brought up with them or caught them. But this youngster, 26 years of old, was reacting to listening to Pink Floyd for the first time. And the reaction that he had was phenomenal. And I was sitting here with my mate, as I say, same age group. And it appears that we didn't grow up listening to the same music. So I grew up listening to Pink Floyd in the mid-60s. And he didn't at all. And he didn't understand what the hell this was about. And I said to him, listen, I think this is the hottest thing since peanut butter. And what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to become an old white guy that's going to react to a young black guy of 26 who's reacting to old rock white guys. And we'll all make a fortune. He couldn't understand it at all. So he left absolutely confused and turned around and said, no, he's going to phone Ivan because he couldn't understand what the hell I was talking about for the previous hour. I was absolutely gushing. And that indicated to me just how people see different things. And hopefully that sort of relates to the topic that we had today. Remind me, Ivan, what was the topic today?
Mainstream or the untrodden path? Which one
here's a guy turning around to me, my sort of age group, and wanting to go over to France and saying, listen, I'm not going to kick the bucket for the next 30 years, God willing, but what can I do? And in essence, he was saying, but I'd rather go mainstream. And I'm turning around to him and saying, but you know what? The future of the world is all these guys who are off mainstream. They're doing crazy things on the net. My 12-year-old granddaughter, she comes out to me and she shows me the Roblox guys. There's a guy on Roblox who's doing Lego type things, and he's commenting. Basically, he's reacting to people designing programs on Roblox, and he's making $8 million a year. And yeah, I've got old bullets coming to me saying, no, I just want to go mainstream and make some money and all this sort of thing. No, you've got to wake up. This world isn't like we used to have it 50 odd years ago. This world has completely changed. So you've got to go off meandering all over the place to actually find out how you can actually tweak and twist what this young generation is doing now. And we've got to think young, but we've got the experience. So, you know, off the beaten track in the commercial world, I think, or in this global world is where I'm positioned. Don't give me old farts. I'm not listening to any more people on this forum here because I can't see any people that are not old farts, but I'll keep an open mind.
All right, thanks, Trevor. So yeah, seeing as you were talking about off the beaten track, we have to go to the guy who generally treads those tracks on an ongoing basis for long distances. So Ed, is Trevor right or is Trevor wrong, or what is your thoughts on this particular one?
I must admit, I hadn't, as usual, done as much preparation as I normally do. And I was kind of desperately hoping that the first person that spoke would kind of give me a strong steer. And as far as I could make out, Trevor just talked about what he wanted to talk about. So while he was talking, I looked at the question that Lee posed us. And the question was, and there's a preamble about being a black sheep and all that sort of stuff. And then she said, what therefore does it take to step out of the mainstream? And is this what you want? That was the two questions she posed to us. And Ivan, I've always liked that George Bernard Shaw quote, but when you were reading it out just then, I suddenly thought Grand Canyon. And the Grand Canyon was formed by the mainstream. It was formed by all the little bits of water working together as a river, which, and all the great canyons in the world, you know, Fishhook Canyon, all that sort of stuff, they were all formed by the mainstream. So, you know, I've always thought the mainstream to be wrong, and I've always felt myself a black sheep, but perhaps the mainstream is right. Perhaps the mainstream does achieve a lot. But I like not to be in the mainstream, but you could say, if you're not in the mainstream, you're in a backwater. So I'm a bit confused, really. But I think what it takes to step out of the mainstream is strength. And I love this subject because I can recycle what I said over the last couple of days. And as an environmentalist, I love recycling. And you remember, I didn't cross a river because it was too fast flowing, and I would have died. And I think, if you want to move out of the mainstream, you've got to have a strong base, haven't you? So you don't get knocked over. And of course, if you're crossing a river, it's best to have a couple of walking poles, because then you've got 4 points of contact and you only move 1 point of contact at a time. So you've got a tripod, and tripods are very, very stable. As you would know, Ivan, from your photography background, you can get a stable tripod on any piece of ground. That's why milking stools, if you guys know what a milking stool is, I don't know, but they are tripods, because the milking maid could put her stool down in any old bumpy field and it will be stable. So I think, if you want to step away from the mainstream, you have to have strength and stability and a good base, a good foundation, so you can walk with purpose to get out of that mainstream. And then what you do in that mainstream is up to you. Do you just sit in the backwater, or do you go and find some excitement somewhere? And then I thought about the surfing we talked about and thought, well, how can I recycle that? And of course, surfers know how to use a riptide. So they go out on the rip current to take them out to where the waves are, and then they surf back in. Of course, swimmers that don't know what they're doing get swept out by a riptide, panic, try and swim back in, and are swimming against the current. If they just went left or right, stepped out of the mainstream, they could get back to safety easily. So sometimes perhaps the best path is to stay with the mainstream if you want to get somewhere where the mainstream's going, like a surfer getting out to the waves, and Trevor might come in and tell us the finer points of that. Or if you want to get out of the mainstream, go left or right and get into calmer waters. And then you can paddle your own canoe and go where you want to go, if that's not mixing too many metaphors. So I think there is a huge amount of benefit in the mainstream, because, we achieve a lot together. But that's only if you want to achieve what the mainstream want to achieve. If you want to achieve something different, then you've got to find some way of getting out of that mainstream. And that takes a lot of courage. So that takes a lot of strength and a lot of determination and a lot of agility, I suppose. And also thinking about going across that stream with your 2 poles and your 2 legs, only moving one thing at a time. I think that's a good lesson. If you're going to try and change stuff, don't change everything at the same time, because you're going to lose your balance, you're going to get swept away, you're going to end up downstream somewhere rather than you want to change things a bit at a time and whatever. Unless, of course, you want to just get set free and get swept down the river and see where you end up. But generally speaking, don't change it all at once, change bits and pieces at a time. So those are my ramblings, because I didn't really prepare for it. But yeah, I think mainstream good, but sometimes mainstream not good.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, so one of the questions that comes to mind as you were chatting there is, all those canyons, how did they start? They might have been formed by the mainstream, but they had to start somewhere, and they had to start with that initial trickle, that first drop of rain that sort of started moving way through a different place. And yeah, all the people that followed, all the water that followed, then ultimately created those canyons. But it all has to start with somebody taking a different, or something taking a different direction, doesn't it? So yeah, I think it comes back to Shaw's quote, for me anyway. Someone has to kick a stone down the road, and if that road happens to be a hill with lots of snow on, well, eventually that's going to gather some momentum and turn into an avalanche. But that initial little action is things that precipitates big action at the end of the day. So it's a challenge. I think, we're conditioned by and largely by society, by our schooling systems and all those sorts of things to fit in, to be part of the mainstream, to be part of the worker force. but it still comes down to the Musks, the Freddie Mercurys, if we're talking music, the people that did something completely different. It's interesting. We were chatting, Ria and I, when we were on the road, listening to music. We were talking. Trevor was talking music earlier, and listening to actually the words of some of those Queen songs. I mean, if you listen to some of those words, Bohemian Rhapsody is just one amazing song for me, and you listen to the mix of the lyric and the mix of the different genres and music. I mean, that was completely against the tide of music in its time, and still I don't think has been matched by anybody. So an amazing talent, yeah, burned out very quickly. But I suppose that's what happens when you fight against the current, isn't it, Ed? So yeah. Right, Leo, I know you got problems with your video, but I think your mic was working fine. So let's hear your thoughts on the topic.
Great. Is my mic working?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so mainstream and one's own way. I think for me, the challenge is that often going your own way becomes the mainstream, so I think one day the rockets landing will be the mainstream. So, but I think that the challenge is for anything to move forward, the mainstream can hamper that. So, for example, well, why do you want to land rockets? Everybody's throwing them away in the sea, so then no one starts thinking about landing rockets, and so then rockets don't land, and for 50 years rockets never landed, and so one upstart comes along, he wants to go to Mars, he says, we need to make it cheaper, we can't keep throwing away $60 million at a time. And he starts landing these things, and now he's already landed, 90 of them or whatever, and he's already reused one, I think, 8 times. So people are now going to be following him, and are following him, and they think he's the bee's knees, and I think he's the bee's knees. So he had to break the mainstream to come up with this concept of landing rockets. And there are still some mainstream people who don't want to even do that. I mean, Atlas, he's telling Atlas, you guys are just not going to be competitive because we landing these things now. The challenge, of course, with mainstream is that they can hold you back. So I'm busy putting this new business together, and my sister and her partner are in England, and I'm talking to them, and the negativity, and I mean, they're doing it in love. So Leo, why hasn't it been done in South Africa before? So why are you starting something that hasn't been done in South Africa before? Why are the big companies not doing it in South Africa? And while I appreciate their care and concern, and they don't want me to lose my house and all of that type of stuff, they're not helping me in terms of, okay, so what can I do to make this happen? They're actually preventing me doing it. If they can stop me doing it, they would. And so, of course, if you are going to go your own way, and I probably have done that more often in my life than going down the mainstream. I became a Protestant from a Catholic background. My mother wouldn't sew on the badge when I went to Bible college, because she was Catholic, and while we did love each other, those are very real things. I mean, ultimately, mom trusted God anyway. And so I'm probably not a good mainstream person, but I've fallen on my nose many times. Because I didn't necessarily have the skills to get to the side of the riptide. I loved Ed's chat. So some lovely stuff, Ed, with keeping 4 points. So I'm going to need to remember to keep my 4 points in this journey of new business. And thank you for that. It's been that was a very useful insight. So I think new stuff happens with people who go on their own. and many of those who go on their own fall flat on their face and die. And the mainstream often don't die, you know, because they don't go into the cave with the bear. So I think there needs to be a cautious balance between those who pioneer. You know, I mean, there has to be a first up Mount Everest. You know, Hillary. You know, with his guide. There has to be a first, and then of course when the first happens, everybody does it, you know. The 4-minute mile, everybody else could do it afterwards, you know. So and you have to think differently, you know. These high jumpers, you know, they didn't go over the guy who started beating records didn't go over the high jump bar with the forwards, you know. He went backwards. Well, you have to think quite out of the box to even think of jumping over a bar backwards, you know. I mean, who does that? You know, come on, you know. And now everybody's jumping backwards, you know. Now that's the mainstream, you know. So I watched the other day somebody doing long jump, and they're doing long jump with a somersault. And I thought, who on earth does that? You know, I mean, you know, so maybe one day long jump's going to be happening with a somersault, you know, in the middle, you know, so to get longer distances. So I think we need to love and appreciate those who do it their own way, and maybe not criticize them so much. I hate being criticized. I tell you, it's one of my weaknesses, and I just, you know, I walk away now, and maybe because I was criticized so much. But yeah, so I think there's room for both. Obviously, the mainstream is more stable, but certainly the mainstream will never get anything done, because they always do it by the person who's done it on their own. You know, so the people who do it on their own become the mainstream that people follow. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Les. I think we're having a morning of mixed and muddled metaphors all over the place, but it's making for an interesting conversation. So, Jasper, finally you've muted yourself, but I'm going to ask you to unmute and tell us your thoughts.
I muted myself so that I can cough, and I didn't want to cough in your face because none of you were wearing masks, and I wanted to protect you. All right, yeah, I think, like you say, very interesting metaphors that have come up, and very useful metaphors. I see you put on your mask, Ivan. Thank you. And I was just thinking about this. You know, one tends to, when a topic comes up with giving you 2 pointers like mainstream or uncharted, that by itself tends then to position you to choose the one or the other. And what came up to me is, well, first of all, in many instances, did you have a choice? So many people find themselves in uncharted territory because they now lost their job, or, you know, circumstances are just forcing them out into a new venture. So for them, it's uncharted territory, but they almost had no choice in the matter. Circumstances just dictated to them. But then as I listened to all the talks coming out, and the nice analogy that Ed gave there with the riptide and using it to come in, if you're clever and another person don't know how to do it, and he can even drown. But I think mainstream versus uncharted territory is not an or question. It's an and question. And it takes skill to know when to use the mainstream to your advantage up to a point where you then move out of the stream and then start your own thing. That made me also think about, there's actually nothing new. Everything we now think of as breakthroughs is basically just people who started to question the status quo, and in questioning the status quo might have gone totally off the chart, but then eventually came back full circle and say, okay, what components in the current equation works, what doesn't work, and just reassemble them and repackaging them. And all of a sudden it's the flavor of the day. So I think much of what's so-called happening in social media is just people who are playing around with what components are there to use and find different ways of using it. And it's fresh for a while, but I don't think in any of these social media trends, there's longevity. One will have to see how many of these people who earn 8 million today still earn 8 million 5 years from now. But guys like Elon Musk, they've got the money behind them, and okay, so their thing is more structured. So unfortunately, we are in this kind of and world. You want to do your own thing, you want to row your canoe in your own direction, but at the same time, we do need the structures of society to allow us to go forward. And I was just thinking of, I've now, and you know, similar like Liu, when you start something new, people ask you, but why has it not been done before? Well, simply because there was no one else to do it before. And people didn't think about it. And I was thinking of just this whole generational message. There's nothing new about it. The website is, Google is full of articles on generational thinking and generational wealth and stuff like that. But just by making it now accessible and putting some sort of structure behind it, people are waking up to it, and it's changing lives. So in a way, you can say that I've started something that wasn't there before. It was uncharted territory. It was not mainstream. But in order to move forward and be sustainable, I'm now almost trying to create a new mainstream around me that can give me momentum in order to be sustained. So you need the one in order to stay uncharted. So you will stay uncharted until it has gathered enough momentum that it becomes the new mainstream, and then you become the enemy and people start breaking you down. So it'll be interesting to see what is the final analysis of, is it mainstream or uncharted, or is it both?
Thanks, Jasper. Yeah, it's you know, the cycle of construction and destruction is one of the cycles of business, isn't it? You know, you've got to build something, and then you've got to constructively destruct it again to build it again. So you go through these cycles, because nothing is permanent, is it? In the world of life or business. As I've said before, another of my favorite quotes that came from one of my business partners is, nothing keeps on changing. Well, that's not really true, is it? But some people think it is, and they like sitting on the status quo, and that's not the band in this case. But yeah, a great band. I do agree, Ed. So yeah, they think the status quo is something that is permanent, and it's probably the least permanent thing in our world, because everything keeps on changing, isn't it? Change is the only constant. So how do you actually leverage that to your advantage in the process, whether you're in the mainstream or whether you are trying to forge your own path out into the uncharted territories of exploration, whether it's physical or business or mental or spiritual, doesn't really matter, I suppose. You know, there could be uncharted territories for you in all of those elements of life. Do you have the courage to open that door? As possibly the real question at the end of the day. So if you've got that courage to step out into the unknown, who knows what you might achieve, what you might find. Sure, you might get caught in the riptide and not come back. But you might just find that riptide is circular and it brings you back just a little bit further up the beach. So I know a place where that happens on a regular basis, and your analogy, Ed, there was really rung home for me. A place that I've spent many years, or many Christmases of my years, down in the South Cape Coast. There's a beach, and they've got these circular riptides that run along the beach, and people who do drown on that beach do exactly what you say. They get caught, they go out, they try and come back against it. If you knew a little bit about it and just relaxed, you'd be brought back onto the beach about 200 meters up the way without any real challenges. But it comes down to knowledge, experience, and other elements there, I suppose. So, guys, yeah, topic for tomorrow. One thing that sort of came to mind as Jasper was talking is choice. I'm not sure if we've had that as a topic before, but do you never have a choice, or do you always have a choice? Are there situations where you don't have choices, as Jasper alluded to? I think you've always got a choice, but maybe that's something we can go on, unless there's any other thoughts, another topic perhaps that we'd like to chat about. Anybody? Should we talk about choice? Everyone happy with that? Good. All right. Let's choose to talk about choice. And then we'll see where that takes us tomorrow. So have a great day further, guys, and we'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.
Cheerio.